here's a common mistake that I see, Ryan, is that people are good at the STAR formula or CAR. So they
Yeah.
set up the situation, they talk about the actions, then they talk about the result. But most common mistake that I see when people are using that response technique is they forget the results or they don't go into it enough. So
Mm,
if you think of interviewing like a story, and there's so many correlations between storytelling and interviewing,
yeah.
um, you want to bring them along this journey with you. So what happens is people skip over the results or they don't pay enough attention to it, and then your listener is kind of left hanging. So really think about that result. That is the best part. And that is the most transferable part.
Welcome to the Tech Guide podcast. I'm the show's host, Ryan Atkinson. Everyone is wanting to break into tech and have a successful career. The only problem is how. We'll use this podcast to sit down with people that have broken into tech, pivoted their career, or have actual advice to young working professionals. Today, we have Paula Christensen on the podcast to talk about how you can structure your resume so recruiters will take notice, advice for showing up as your best self in a virtual interview, and techniques you can use for a behavioral interview. We also end with career planning for young professionals. Make sure to follow or subscribe to this podcast and share with any other friends that may want a tech guide. You can also learn more about us at techguide.org. Hey, thank you for being here, Paula. Super excited to have you on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
I want to talk about your life outside of work because that's always super important to talk about just in work priorities, personal life priorities. So I want to ask, like, how do you de-stress from work? It's a super long day. How are you taking your mind off of work?
I would say that just trying to get outside. I love walking my dog. I'm kind of an avid podcast listener, and part of that is because I walk my dog. So, like, that walking the dog came first, and then podcasts came after that, and so it's a great way to kind of combine the two. But yeah, I love being outside. Period. Wherever I
Yeah.
can do that. I used to be a little bit more avid of an exerciser, and I hurt my back last year, so I'm coming off that. I'm doing well. But, yeah, that would have been how I used to answer that question, but I still am able to, like, kind of focus on that, but in a different way now. It's just kind of like I tweaked that a little bit and
Mm.
doing the walking instead of running and skiing and some other things, but being outside is just a huge priority for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you are a busy, busy person. You started strategic career coaches almost 8 years ago to help with resume drafting, interview coaching, and career coaching. Take us to this time. I mean, how did you think to start strategic career coaches?
I was a recruiter years ago. I was a corporate recruiter and I loved it, but then I took some time away to be a stay-at-home mom. I just didn't there was a point where I was pregnant with my 3rd child, like, how is this all gonna work? I do not actually see how I'm gonna do this, and I took some time off, and then I fell into a different career. It was almost a little bit by accident. I was doing a program with my kids, and then I started helping part-time, and then they needed somebody to run the program, and I did it interim, and then I think I did a great job, but it never felt quite right. I never wanted to work with preschool children. Like, no offense, love my own kids, but didn't really ever want to watch anyone else's. So, and I love the families, and I made some really great friends, but it wasn't quite right. And so I did some soul searching. What really fired me up? What was I good at? And when I worked as a recruiter, I loved interview coaching. So
Mm.
one time a year, we would go to colleges around town and we would do mock interviews. And the
That's
rest of
awesome.
the team hated this experience. Like, nobody wanted to sign up. I signed up every year. I came home just buzzing because I loved it. And so it took me a while to like tap into that and remember
Yeah.
that. And then I didn't even know that that was a thing. I mean, it kind of wasn't 7 years ago. There still aren't many interview coaches in my city.
Hmm.
But so anyway, I got some certifications, got myself back up to speed,
That's really cool.
gained some experience, gained a lot of really great industry contacts, and then started working with clients. And yeah, so that I started my business kind of really tapping into where my strengths were and what
Mhm.
part of recruiting I really loved. So I loved helping people. That's been a thread that's gone
Mm.
across all my jobs. But with their recruiting, I wasn't able to give that feedback. And that really bothered me because I saw so many people, especially young professionals, who could have gotten a little bit of advice and done so much better. And so it's extremely rewarding for me now, like to
Yeah.
be able to give that advice and to see people make huge strides with just a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love that you do like the full-fledged, like full, not sales cycle, but the full recruiting cycle of like resumes to interview coaching to career coaching.
Mhm.
And we're actually going to start off with like the resume tips. So this is like the first part of an interview or job process, and you're getting ready to structure this interview or structure this resume, excuse
Mhm.
me. You're getting ready to structure this resume. So let's just say you're going after like a sales or marketing role or some sort of role, however you want to take it. How should you cater a resume to like specific industries?
Well, be really specific. I would say that a lot of people don't do that. They don't target it. So
Yeah.
do your research, look at job postings, maybe plug some job postings into Chat GPT,
Mhm.
go into LinkedIn and try to find some keywords through their resume builder that they have within LinkedIn. So use the tools available to you to really kind of focus on, okay, what is the job description? And then almost you can kind of reverse engineer it. Okay, how have I hit those key points? And then maybe write some bullet points that kind of demonstrate how you've hit those key points. So a lot of people really what they do is they just kind of get lazy about it and they
Yeah.
take information from the job posting and then they have those duties within their resume. And I say go a little bit deeper. What are your accomplishments? Yes, you have to align with that role. That's really, really important. So I like to have a little mini job description, just a couple sentences about what that role entails at your position.
Yeah.
But then I like to have those bullet points. And what those are really is differentiating you. So first you're aligning, then you're differentiating. And usually that's by your accomplishments.
That's amazing. And so you're aligning your accomplishments, you have everything here, you have the keywords, everything's in place. Like you're like, this is really good. But how do you make that resume like stand out when it gets into the recruiter's hands? Like what is there any particular way that you would make it like really stand out to recruiters?
Well, I think some of those are the ways we're like really thinking about those keywords.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, we didn't even talk about this, but on the front end,
Yeah.
what are you doing? Are you building relationships with people at that company?
Yeah.
Can maybe somebody go to bat for you who's
Yeah.
worked with you in the past? So really some of those networking things that people hate to do, that really makes a huge difference with your resume. So even most resume writers will say like, yeah, resume is not all it.
Yeah.
I mean, resumes are great. I believe in resumes, but I do believe in some things are those personal relationships that you develop are more
Mhm.
important than a really great resume. So some people kind of almost, I've worked with people in the past who they get stuck on the resume. They're trying to make it perfect. They're trying to make it keyword optimized. And if they absolutely use that as a stall technique and
Ah,
a reason to maybe not apply and a reason to not kind of step out of the comfort zone of just applying online. So really, I mean, do the hard things is not what people want to hear, but that's really the what's going to have you be most successful. So try to find somebody in that company, try to learn,
yeah.
do some networking, find out what do they really need in this position. Are there things you can do to bolster your resume? So maybe that means taking a weekend course in Adobe Illustrator.
Yeah.
And then, that sometimes you can easily acquire things that are needed, but you really don't know what's needed until you do the deep dive.
That's amazing. So it'd be like reaching out to someone that's in the company in like a similar role and be like, "Hey, can we sit down for 20 minutes? I'm really interested in XYZ role and I would love to hear like what you guys are really looking for."
Right. And you might have to send that message to 10 different people for one to reply. So that's where people who have a background in sales or maybe
Yeah.
had like people in their family members in sales, they do better at this because they realize like that rejection aspect of it. But yeah,
Yeah.
you are not going to get a lot of replies to that, but keep trying, keep going out there. And I say like keep building your net or your
Mm,
network. So that could mean you contact your neighbor John, who
yeah.
has a cousin who used to work at that company who knows
Mm,
somebody. So don't be afraid to do like that Kevin Bacon 3 degrees of separation thing
yeah.
to find somebody who would be willing to give you that 20 minutes.
That's interesting. What's the importance? Because whenever you're like filling out a resume or like a job application, it's like Do you have a reference to like somebody here? Like, how did you hear about this job? Can you talk about like the importance of having a reference at the company? Does it matter? Does it not matter? Or like, how do you coach it?
Yeah, it matters for sure. If you can take that extra step, it's huge.
Yeah.
So if you, let's say your neighbor John has a cousin who has a neighbor and you're able to talk to that person and you do meet with them for 20 minutes, you don't, at the end of the conversation, you can say, I'm applying for XYZ position. Is it okay if I would write your name down?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they have to know you. It doesn't mean they worked with you and they will necessarily go to bat for you. But just having that name down on there is huge. I wish I had the exact statistic, like, at the top of my head, but
Yeah.
I know it's very high that if you and then what I like to do, what I like to tell clients is in your cover letter, name drop that right away.
Nice.
So and so, and you don't have to say they encouraged me to apply. You can say that if they did, but maybe you just had a conversation with them and you say, I was able to speak with so and so about the XYZ job,
Yep.
made me really excited. And you can still, as long as you've got their permission, you can still name drop them and do it right away. Like, almost
Mhm.
first sentence in your cover letter.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I know like a cover letter, it's always coached to like dear or XYZ or like to whom it concern. I'm applying
Yeah.
to XYZ that I found on LinkedIn. But instead of
Mhm.
putting that, you feel I talked to John Smith at your company about this role and I feel like qualified to apply for it.
Yeah, yeah, and depending on your relationship with that person, you could actually email it to them and they send it on, or you
Mhm.
could just reference their name.
Oh, that's an amazing strategy.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm curious. So, into addition to like a well-written resume, you're applying for a job. How can you ensure from the get-go that you're on the right track to have like a successful job search? Or is there like setting goals, criteria, or how would you recommend people to start their job search off on the right foot?
Yeah, I think it have a multi-pronged approach.
Mm,
So you're not just thinking about your resume, you're thinking about your resume, your cover letter, your elevator pitch, your networking, your LinkedIn profile, your follow-up, your thank you, So do all those little things, they can really make a huge difference. So if you just do one of those things, you might not notice, nobody might hear, if you follow up, you might not get a response, but if I promise you, if you take the time to do all the little things, it's really going to pay off. So, like, just it does take more work,
yeah.
but think about a multi-pronged approach. You're not just gonna apply online, you're gonna
Yep.
keep doing that. I don't wanna tell people don't apply online, but apply online plus, develop your targeted list of companies, plus network through who might work at those companies,
Yep.
plus expand your network, gain skills. I didn't even talk about that. That's a huge
Yeah.
one as well. So, yeah, do all the things.
Awesome.
Mhm.
So you get your resume and you get the recommendation. You get an interview. You get a virtual interview. The world is opened up to stage. So in the age of like virtual interviews, what tips can you offer to help clients present themselves effectively in an online setting, ensuring that they're making like a really strong first impression in a virtual setting?
Yeah, so virtual, it's so important now. I mean, so much business is being done virtually
Hmm.
that if you're not keeping up with this, you are behind the times.
Yeah.
So I find this is usually not as big of a deal for my younger clients because they kind of grew up in this world. But a lot of my older clients who maybe have never done, like, FaceTiming their family every day or, they haven't gotten on board. They've never had to do a video interview before. So I worry a little bit more about them. But tips and tricks are like, get familiar with the platform, practice, practice, practice. So you can do a one-way Zoom session, you can record yourself, you can review that. Practicing out loud just for that smoothness and that comfortability is huge. Just little things like make sure your camera, if you can position the screen so that, like, right now, Ryan, I have you positioned right below my camera, and then I've
Yeah.
trained my eye not to look at myself.
That's
And that took
yeah.
some practice. I'm sure you've probably done that too.
Mhm.
Like, it does take some practice. So the more you do that, online interviewing sites are huge for this. So they have blogs like Hire View, Spark Hire, Interviewer, AI. Those are three
Yeah.
top ones. And they all have blogs and tips and tricks. So, follow some of those companies and then just before your interview, kind of look at those. And then just you have to fill that gap. So
Yeah.
creating engagement online is so much more difficult.
It is.
So you're right. So what that means is you really have to be conscious about it. So think about how you're presenting yourself, smile, engage, laugh, use more hand gestures, nod more. All of those things make a difference on video because it is so flat and unengaging. Another thing to think about is to sit forward on your chair. So
Mm,
like on the first kind of half of your chair,
yeah.
you want your shoulders how did I say that? Back, but or not tight, but
Yeah.
shoulders strong,
Yeah.
but not tight. And so that you're sitting up and you're filling the frame. And then think about how much of the frame you're filling. You want a little bit of your torso so that they can see your hand
Yeah.
gestures. And then you want to really, really kind of look into that camera and you want to fill up a little bit of the frame, not too much. You don't
Yeah.
want too much of your room showing and then think about your background a little bit as well.
Mhm.
So, your background is part of your brand.
Yep.
So I had a client who interviewed for kind of an offshoot of a sports industry. He was doing like more like data and analytics
Yeah.
for a sporting venue. And he had on purpose on his bookshelf behind him some sports memorabilia kind of thing
That's
that
good.
and it was thoughtful that he
Yeah.
put it there and he was like intentional about it. And so think about your background, that's part of your brand. You don't have to have it planned. I'm
Mhm.
not one of those coaches who say that, but just make sure that you're doing what's back there because it might be a conversation piece
Yeah.
and it might reflect on you, good or bad.
Yeah. That's actually a tip that I actually got from someone because my background right now, you just spoke to me. My background right now is very true. I have an Apple poster right here and like, and so I think that's a topic that isn't talked about enough is like you need, yes, your frame needs to be good and everything, but you need to be intentional about your background. Could that I don't want to say that could make or break the interview, but it is part of your brand and essentially it could be a conversation starter.
Yeah, I don't think it will make or break it either. But I did have like a client who had like a picture of a provocative woman in the back. I'm like, "Really?" It wasn't like a nude or anything. It was like a
Yeah.
silhouette, but it was just like enough of a question, like, why? Like
Yeah.
let's not raise any, it's probably not a red flag, but it might be like an orange flag.
Yeah.
So let's like take that out of consideration.
I like that. I like that. And so let's just say like your first virtual interview goes really well. You presented yourself really powerfully. I don't know if that's the right word for it. So how should candidates prepare for different types of interviews, such as like behavioral interview, a situational interview, or technical interview? And like what strategies would you give to someone that's approaching each of these interviews?
Yeah, those are all different. I would my strategy is really preparation. So do a deep dive. If you can practice with another person, that's all the better.
Yeah.
There are some tools out there to help with just like kind of like your comfortability. And the
Mm,
more you practice, the better you'll be. So basically, I like to have most of what I do with clients when I do mock interview coaching is behavioral interviewing. I feel like that is more difficult. So if they
yeah.
prepare for behavioral interview questions, they're going to naturally kind of be okay with the situational interview
Yeah.
because like then they can use an example anyway, and that always looks good. And then the technical interviews, that's just a whole nother ball game. I don't do that much of that kind of preparation
Mm,
because really those are just something that it's hard to prepare for. It's kind of
yeah.
like either you have those technical skills or you don't. Doesn't mean that you can't do research like glassdoor.com has reviews on companies. They have a whole interview section that you can go into to try to find out about those.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think the main thing is to prepare and then prepare differently for all three of those things.
Ah. Is there like when it comes to a behavioral interview, is there like a framework that you use? Because I know like the STAR method's huge, like across the board. Is that the framework you use, or like what frameworks do you use when preparing?
Yeah, I use something similar. It's kind of an offshoot of star and car.
Mm,
So most of the time people are so familiar with
yeah,
those. And I'll say like just Google it,
yeah,
So anyway, I love those frameworks, but I do think they only bring people partway through.
yeah,
Or maybe here's a common mistake that I see, Ryan, is that people are good at the star formula or CAR. So they
yeah,
set up the situation, they talk about the actions, then they talk about the result. But most common mistake that I see when people are using that response technique is they forget the results or they don't go into it enough. So
mm,
if you think of interviewing like a story, and there's so many correlations between storytelling and interviewing,
yeah,
you want to bring them along this journey with you. So what happens is people skip over the results or they don't pay enough attention to it. And then your listener is kind of left hanging. So really think about that result. That is the best part. And that is the most transferable part.
Mm,
So let's say, for example, that somebody says like, yeah, we had a challenge with our old ERP system. It wasn't working. I revamped the ERP system. We put
yeah.
in a new one. We researched it. I got a team involved. The result was got more. It helped our business a lot.
Yeah.
And I say go deeper. Okay,
Yeah.
what does that result mean? What were the quantifiable metrics there? So
Mhm.
did that bring in more customers? Did that save time? Did that save money? How much?
Yep.
Really think about the specifics there. And then when you think about the how transferable to that next job, you may never have to um, put in a new ERP system at this new company. But are they going to want somebody who saves money, saves time, puts in a process that makes things more efficient? Absolutely. So
Mm,
that result, that R of that formula is usually the most transferable part. And then for my formula, what I do is go a little bit deeper. And usually it's for my leaders, but not always. Okay, what does that mean then? What did you learn? So, like, if you can do a little bit more emotional intelligence and kind of, it's a great chance for you to demonstrate it to where you say, I learned that, boy, I made a mistake with this. Or I learned that we needed to get this team involved more quickly.
yep, yep, yep.
And really doing that introspection. What did you learn? What would you have done differently? What were the key takeaways from this? Having that deeper aspect of it really kind of shows your how strong of a candidate you are when you answer those questions that way.
Yeah, and it kind of puts like that like an emotional connection to it or like emotional intelligence to it because like you're identifying like what like really changed in like my own process and like you're able to reflect back on your experiences and how the bottom line for it.
Right, exactly. And also like kind of gets at those soft skills.
Yeah.
That's the part that's often difficult to demonstrate in an interview.
Yeah.
And when you kind of do that self-reflection or that deeper level thinking of it, kind of usually gets at those soft skills involved.
Yeah. And I also, in your last response, a question popped up in my head because I just read Stories That Stick. I can't think of the author, but she talked about essentially how people connect to stories if it's in a job interview, telling your founder story, value story, any of that. And so you coach clients to like share their story, but also tie that result in at the end because
Right,
resonate
exactly.
with it better. But it also is what is that result and like what did you actually do with it?
Right. And that's also, I'm going to write that book down, Ryan, because
It's great.
that's awesome. That's the area of interview coaching that I really want to dig into is really the storytelling. I think there's so many correlations and really interviews could be like a celebrity who's
Yeah.
got a PR team who,
Yeah.
who kind of teaches them how to answer, or even a political candidate.
Hmm.
Really, what are your talking points? How are those stories? So I love that too about founders of companies because I really resonate with that. Like
Yeah.
how I built this podcast and some others, I love those stories that are involved. And there's a book I meant to bring it in here. I think it's Master Storytelling or something like that. And there's two authors. One of them is Mark Carpenter. And anyway, what he does is he talks about the oxytocin that's involved in
Yeah.
storytelling. So the listener is really put along that journey with you, and they're actually feeling those emotions,
Yeah.
and they're actually like anticipating the ending, and like that's so cool. Like our brains are connecting on that level.
Mm,
So if you're not really telling those examples or going into the stories, then you're kind of missing out on part of really the goal of interviewing is connection and
yeah,
engagement. And so like a great way to do that is through stories.
I love that. How I prepared for a lot of my interviews when I was like going through like a lot of interviews like right after school or like the- at the end of school, I would go through my resume and okay, what are the bullet points here? And then I would try and connect like some sort of story to that. And so when it was asked about it in like the interview, I could tell a story about that, and you can like really feel the people like resonate with that because we all resonate to stories. Been telling stories since we didn't even have wheels, so I think
Right.
it's super important to put
Mhm,
stories into like your recruiting process and in a job interview.
mhm.
I also want to talk about so let's just say you have a great interview. It went super, super well. You hit it off really well. You told stories. You did all the good stuff. How do you coach clients to follow up after the interview to really like hone in on that last like great impression?
I, first of all, do follow up.
Yeah.
You can stand out from so many of other candidates by just simply doing that. It's really, really sad. I mean, recruiters say like it's not very common.
Yeah.
Most people don't follow up. So it's a really easy way to stick out. So, think about how you connected with that person. And then I recommend trying to connect on the avenue that you did. So if you've had a LinkedIn, relationship with them, maybe that's the best place to follow up. Maybe it's through email. I love video recordings or voice recordings. It's just different.
Yep.
So doing something different that makes you stand out is really, there are people who are going to take notice. So if they get a voice message, they might be more likely to click on it, or a video, thank you, than they are like the traditional thank you letter that's just like everybody else's. So for sure, do it, but then also try to think about some unique ways that you can do that.
Yeah.
And then I recommend continuing that relationship. So I had a client last year who she didn't get the job. She was second in line. She was heartbroken. She absolutely loved that job and wanted that job. And what she did, she was almost so dejected that she didn't want to maintain that relationship. In the beginning, she kind of forced herself. So now and again, she might send an email saying, hey, I noticed this article, or I saw your LinkedIn post, and just kind of keeping the door open. And sure enough, about 6 months later, that manager had a contact of his in, a competitor actually.
Wow.
And he put her name forward because he thought she was great. Sometimes it works out where they have a new position and they hired you, and that's a great story too. But other times, like maybe there's something different and they recommended you to somebody, you extended your network, and that worked out for her. And so I just say, even the long-term follow-up is, number one, you have a new industry connection.
Yeah.
That's enough right there. But number two, it could turn into something else. They might remember you down the line. You never know. That person, industries are small, cities are small, people get to know each other. And it's hard to know that when you're a younger person.
Yeah.
You don't really have that perspective. But somebody who's older, I'm amazed at the circles that I still run in with people just because of the relationships that I formed, 20, 25 years ago.
That's awesome. And so we talked about resumes, we talked about interviews, but I also want to talk about like the bigger, broader career of a young working professional, how they should be thinking about their career. So can you share with us like key principles that you've worked with clients to help like achieve a successful career? If it's goal setting, if it's planning, are there any principles that a young working professional should consider?
I don't work that much with people on like goal setting or kind of like down the road. I'm kind of like that career coach who works with people who know what they want, and then they go after it, and then they might come back to me down the road. But I would just say, just thinking about the answer to that question, the things that come to mind are really developing that network. So for me personally, I took some time away. I was a stay-at-home mom. I did not maintain that network, and it really impacted my career. And I wish I would have had the foresight to kind of like prioritize those connections. And it took me longer to re-enter the workforce because I didn't do that. So really keep touch with those former colleagues, keep abreast of opportunities. You just never know. And then the second thing to think about is just continuously learning. So if you think about when I graduated college, like a million years ago, we didn't have what you guys have, what we all have available now, right? So we had freaking encyclopedias to look up stuff. So, you have no excuse now to not be developing your skills. It is, LinkedIn Learning has thousands of courses, Coursera, Udemy, there's a million others. So keep learning, keep being curious about new things, and keep developing your skills. So a lot of times people will come to me, okay, what's the best, we might be facing a recession. What's the best way to recession-proof my career? That's it right there. Keep developing your skills, keep taking on those projects that are difficult. Keep stepping outside of your comfort zone so that you can keep broadening and expanding and getting better and like learning what you're good at.
Yeah. Are there any like soft skills that like you would recommend people to like double down in if it's a recession, if it's like not even a recession? Is there like one sort of soft skill that you think is like marketable across all industries?
I guess the couple that come to mind are like adaptability
Mm,
and ability, which is similar,
yeah.
is ability to roll with change.
Mm,
So some of my most successful clients who've been like senior level leaders, I think that's two things that come up where they're like, you know what, we had to lay off a whole department and here's what we had to do. And instead of running from the fire, I had to run in there. So I would think those couple of things are like what companies are going to really be looking for is people that can pivot and change, maybe fill a different role because maybe now HR has to also cover something else.
mm.
So being able to kind of work with change is going to be really important as we move forward.
Awesome. Well, Paula, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an awesome episode. There is a ton of tidbits in here. So I'm super thankful we could get you on today's episode. You were great.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. I'm happy to do it, and I always look forward to talking with you.